are strong about, yeah.
Any further comment on the, this is a, I mean, while we aren't in the form of motions and seconds at this point, the idea on the table is to make, is to have it read like that, require connectivity. And Carrie, if I remember, if you scroll down,
I think we should
there are a couple of other places that had include opportunities for, Carolyn, is it your intent to follow your same recommendation?
Whenever the opportunities arise, they should follow the same recommendation.
And Kathy, a note for the zoning board and for myself, when the zoning board gets these recommendations, they're also going to be getting every comment.
Okay.
So that'll make it clear, hopefully make it clear what the intent is.
Are there any other of your recommendations from last meeting that anyone would like to bring forward any further change? Are you ready to move on?
Yes.
And I think, Mr. Chair, it would be appropriate to have a motion on this, adopting this set of draft recommendations.
Do we have any motion to adopt the draft recommendations that we will look at again and move forward to policy area 3?
I make a motion to accept the draft recommendations for policy 2.
As
amended tonight.
Any seconds?
Second.
Bob seconds, so all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. Let's go to 3 point, wherever we left off.
Yeah, I think you worked through policy area 3, 3.1, and 3.2, and my notes said that we're beginning at 3.3.
I had us at 3.2.
I said 3.2.
Yeah, I stopped at 3.1.
I've got it.
There you go, Bill.
Right here.
So we stopped at 3.1, we're going into 3.2 now.
So we're on to 3.2, which is about large trees, ponds, creeks, or other natural features should be saved when locating new streets, buildings, parking lots, etc. Okay, and from the comments that you made, the first of those consolidated recommendations include trees and natural features in the scenic corridor, what's the A mean? Area, scenic corridor area statement of intent. Any concern, any comment on that? The second, says strengthen the language in this section. It must be a particular section of the UDO.
Yeah, I wasn't quite
About
sure.
removal of or disruption.
This
Oh,
was
shall be discouraged.
Priscilla. I don't know, maybe I have a better hint at what you were getting at, so I can go into more detail. But the page is on 135.
Priscilla, do you have any clarity on what you were suggesting, since I think that particular recommendation relates to your comment?
That last
Oh,
paragraph.
that last paragraph. It said shall be minimized, and I just put shall be discouraged.
Okay, So there's a sense of discouraging them rather than minimizing. Okay.
Right, I mean, the whole point of this is so that we keep our traditional and historical structures, architectural elements. So it should be discouraged, not minimized.
Okay. Okay. On to the next recommendation. Remember where it's in green, that's the language proposed for your recommendation. Where it's not green, highlighted in green, Carrie's provided an answer or a response to a question usually. So the next recommendation is include criteria for this policy area also in the transportation standards. So that when roads are being built and transportation standards, the language about tree preservation and ponds and other natural features would be carried over.
And that could have a lot of implications when we talk about road standards that allow the preservation of trees.
Going on, strengthening the language in the landscaping section of the ordinance to require the preservation of existing landscaping. And anyone, either the person, people who raised that comment, do you have anything that you'd like to add to that?
She needs to go to the left so we can see what page they're talking about.
3.2654.
Maybe scroll, let's see who. Okay,
Page 654, trying to balance size of the.
okay, any,
Well, what if the existing landscaping is hideous?
Well, geez, that's a great point.
I mean, certainly you can improve something. I mean, just because it's been there for a long time, it doesn't mean it's actually attractive or worth keeping. I'm sorry, I do a lot of gardening, I got a lot of opinions about what things look
I
like.
think there's a part in the UDO where it says that you'll remove dead or invasive species, or maybe not. If not, we can just add that, where if you go in there and there's a bunch of dead, ugly trees and stuff, you can say that that's not part of your conservation
Right.
area.
I mean, doesn't that come to common sense?
So I think that what we're
common
talking
sense
about
not
here
common?
It's
is
not.
things like, there's a bunch of elements listed in the comp plan about what's desirable vegetation to preserve, what's relevant. So if I say that existing landscape that satisfies these policies, we'll be putting language in there that says all the things that the comp plan says are important for vegetation, trees, not scrub brush. I see what you're saying.
So, all right.
We want to make sure,
What's the definition of landscaping?
this is
There's
the-
like something that was actually put there, or something that grew on its own when nobody was paying attention? I mean, there's sorry, I'm a guess.
Well, I think it was large trees was
Right.
the intent, was large trees,
Right,
not.
okay, yeah.
Yeah. So that'll pull it back to the comp plan. And this is making sure that if all we're following is the landscaping section, that we're not allowing them to cut down a big tree in order to provide that plant species list landscape buffer. That allows us to prioritize.
One issue you can get into is that there's some very large trees that are very undesirable.
Yeah, it's like some cedar, some of these.
Sweet gums.
Yeah.
Sweet gums, pines, a lot of trees that have weak root systems.
That's
that-
Kathy's point.
Yeah.
And invasives like ailanthus.
Clear it
This'll do it. Make sure when there's something good, we
Practically, if I recall the last discussion, last meeting, this starts with a type of a survey that the developer or site planner is proposing that would identify these species, specimen type trees.
So maybe the word desirable or something, desirable orange tree.
Add the word
Desirable.
including desirable.
Okay. And I still like keeping that satisfies the policies, because that gives us some in justifying why we're doing this.
Can I go back on the previous point that you were looking at, just to, for clarity?
Transportation or the.
Yeah, on the question, architectural elements shall be minimized versus discouraged. I have a little bit of an issue with that, because you can discourage someone and still not have any real control over it. You can specify that you will need something minimized, and then you can define the minimization. So I can tell someone, you can't go past this point, versus I discourage you from going past
So
this
you're
point.
arguing for retaining the word minimized, because at least it points in a direction.
It gives you some control over the outcome. Discouraging doesn't give you control of the outcome.
And I can go back to where it was, I'm just kind of getting an idea of.
I mean, that's just my interpretation, that if you tell someone you need to minimize a certain condition versus discouraging, you're still leaving it up to them to decide whether they want to do away with something.
Commentary on that? We had some earlier suggestion, I guess,
Or as Carrie would decide, then what, minimizing.
Well, this gives me a criteria, so I don't have to make that decision. So criteria would include thresholds, and you want the thresholds to be strong, to be strict,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, and I just feel like if you say you're going to discourage someone from doing that, you're really not stopping them from doing it. You're not controlling whether they do it or not. I'd much prefer to
Does that do it?
be in control.
Does that do it for you, Mary? I just read.
okay. Further
That's fine. Yeah.
commentary on that? Okay, scrolling, we're at the, including language in the landscaping section, and then, this is include preservation of vegetation and historic resources in the statement of intent. So adds to those other intents. The next, ensure relevant elements are included as common area or other protected means to ensure protection of all resources. Carrie, if I remember, when you say all resources, you're really meaning trees, ponds, creeks, other natural features,
All the
historic.
things that are addressed, and this might be ensure relevant elements are protected as common area. That's what that really, are included, means that they're assigned somehow to something that is going to give it control.
So do you want to make that change?
Protect it for future development.
But Carrie,
Can you
so
explain that
common
sentence?
areas cannot be sold off
That's right.
later on?
Right.
And their disposition has to be laid out in covenants for neighborhood, like how they're maintained, if you've got anything on your property, how you're.
So the site plan would identify common area and would identify features to be protected, preserved. Okay?
That might make more sense.
They're down to an issue where you, Carrie, need to refer to the, confer with the town attorney.
I put it in green, even though it does go to the zoning board necessarily, but it's,
Okay.
in
What are
green
the
because
ones
it's
to
an
the
action.
left that make you say that?
Yeah, what was the comment?
Homeowners associations.
This is about, I don't know the answer to these questions, is what that's about. And this is about what happens if a homeowners association goes bankrupt. Is there a mechanism for us to take over those resources that were protected by the covenant of the homeowners association? And I'm guessing it's going to be somewhat covered in the North Carolina. The condominium act is the one that focuses on common area. It's
Didn't
called
we have that?
condominium act, but it's,
Didn't we have that situation, Carrie? Didn't we have, or was it, did it end up being a sale?
it was a sale, a property that came out of a homeowners association.
Yeah.
And it was handled on an individual basis, but not in a way that had good teeth to it, yeah. It was a property that came out that was open, part of an open space, part of an open space, and it was pulled out of the homeowners association so that it could be sold outside the association so that its uses could change. And the property was not a contributing property to the open space requirement, so it was allowable to do that,
Okay.
but it was,
As a practical matter, Carrie,
yeah,
is that you're, between now and when the committee re-reviews its recommendations,
yeah,
are you able to take it up with the attorney and bring it back?
that's my hope.
Flag it to return to that,
I would just make it a different color then, so.
maybe a chartreuse or something.
That's not the color I would have picked.
Okay?
Red.
That's good.
Hey, good.
Yeah, a little bit softer.
So, so the, whatever that is, peach means it's going to be brought back with some answers.
I'll add a legend, but if I do it
Okay.
right now, I'm gonna make everybody dizzy going.
Okay, are we on to 3.3 then? And this is floodplains, wetlands, steep slopes that are typically not suitable for development should be retained as permanent open space. First recommendation is recommend a review of off-site septic in open space while we're in the policy area 5, to balance it against encouraging best practices for wastewater recharge. So in some sense, that recommendation punts this particular concern and recommendation, looking at what your review of wastewater, or I think it's called sewage treatment options. Any comments on that?
I really don't think open space should be included in that area. The reason I'm saying is we live in a community that has those, and they have failed. And there has been raw sewage up on top of the ground, children were playing, and that would not be up.
So sewage treatment.
I mean, we're talking about off-site septic.
So septic drainage fields
Yes.
should not, your suggestion should not be
open space.
counted as open space.
No, because they're individually owned as well.
Yeah.
So the people that own that lot, that's not really an open space, that's additional property they pay tax on.
Okay.
So this might be stronger, you might say, do not allow off-site septic in open space.
Right.
I just wanted to make sure the best practices, there might be cluster septic systems that serve a whole development that aren't individually owned, that's different, okay.
Carolyn, are you putting that forth as a recommendation?
If it's individually deeded septic systems, no. And I don't know that that's happening now, but it happened when I bought my house in '94. Oh, I think it's still there. I think you have to off-site in this area.
We can do that offsite for sure.
in the northern high school, that entire field that they practice on is
Oh, that's an
all
offsite. Oh, yeah,
septic,
it's awesome.
So,
It's
It's
awesome.
just not safe. I mean, you know, it doesn't happen often, but it does happen.
Oh,
but
your
it's still
own,
on
your own septic.
That's
So
what we're
it's
talking
not-
about.
Okay.
it's just-
Yeah.
Further discussion about this revised recommendation, do not allow individually gated septic areas to be counted as open space.
We still wanna have
Sarah, Kathy.
floodplain, well, I mean, floodplains, that's okay, I guess, but wetlands and steep slopes are considered open space too?
Well, and that's where my concern was using it as primary, because by the time you use steep slopes here as primary, and that you get your 25%, then you don't need to take anything else around here as open space, because we're all on steep slopes.
The creeks and wetlands, things that are already gonna be designated off limits. Can't touch them anyway, so why is that a requirement?
This particular comment was just about whether we can have off-site septic in.
You ready to go to the next recommendation? And this,
I think it's all relevant to this policy now.
this had a number of people making comments, but the response is to research methodologies for protection of sensitive areas in minor subdivisions and private lots through conservation easements. So Carrie, is that something that you're saying you would research, or are you
Yes, because
saying that the committee would urge the zoning?
I think the committee would urge the zoning board to research this together with staff and including an attorney, because I just don't know how far we can go with individual lots.
So the recommendation as in front of you calls for the zoning board to research methodologies for that.
The concern was that it should apply to everything, not just things that are more than 5 lots.
Okay,
So the methodology, how can we do it? How can
Okay. okay. Any comments on that?
So if you have 5 lots, is that considered as a minor subdivision? When does it
we-
become?
4 is minor, 5 is major.
Okay.
Really?
But the set aside is for anything less than 6, right?
Unless any place buildings less than 6.
The open space says.
So,
The open space set aside
yeah, and I don't know why it
does
changed
not
to 6.
address anything less than 6. And all of this language in here really relates to the open space set aside.
I think that,
Then my question was, why doesn't it apply to someone who has a subdivision of 5?
Yeah.
or 4,
Or 4.
or 3, okay.
Yeah, anything less than 6 was exempted from all of this section.
So minor, whatever that definition is, it would have to be defined whether minor is 5 or 6 or 3, or whether we come up with a different definition for minor subdivision versus major.
Because I think if you have a single lot, you don't have any control over it. Someone does a single lot, but I think once you become a subdivision, the town should have some control over open space on a subdivision.
So we would be changing our methodologies to require homeowners associations for less than 5 lots as well, or less than 6 lots, whatever
Whatever the definition.
the definition of minor versus major is. And because the comments are still in there, that reminds us to look at.
And that's in that table 6E3A.
That's right.
Where-
Right, it talks about the number of lots and how much of it.
On mine, it does say less than 5.
Less than 5.
On table,
Page 648.
I was looking at table 6E3A, where it exempts anything that's 6 lots or less.
says
I mean, less than 6 lots.
It says less than 5, so it would be 4, because then there's a 5 to 24 section and 25 to 50. Right,
Is there any,
I mean, it's sort of-
adjustment to this?
It's sort of, I think the idea is that number is what's been used to define minor.
Sense of these to make it consistent and apply to all those developments. Okay, let's go to the next. This is.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Like, say my family wanted to sell their land and we sold it to, all the grandchildren, and we divided it up. Would that be considered a subdivision?
After you do a certain number of lots, it is, because if we sell one more lot on our.
Unless,
So we would have to have a homeowners association?
as of this year, 2017,
That's so-
Priscilla, there's a law was just passed where land is being divided for the division of an estate. It's exempt from subdivision regulation.
Okay.
So,
This
but
is just a very rural
otherwise,
to me to have
yes,
five homeowners,
that's what we're
five
talking about.
lot homeowners associations. I mean, that's why a lot of people come out here is to not have to deal with.
Well, I'm looking for methodologies. I don't know if that's an HOA, I don't know if it's.
Sure,
Not
concern.
that one.
But there's no definition of what constitutes a true HOA and what does that mean in terms of.
Right.
Well, that's why I
Do they
didn't put
collect dues?
HOA
Do they
in
have
there.
any-
Yeah,
right,
that's a
so
whole other
You have
element.
an HOA, but it doesn't mean that there's dues, it doesn't mean that there's restrictive covenants in the neighborhood or anything. You just have an HOA.
That's why the word
So,
methodologies
It
is
could,
not.
I mean, there's neighborhoods that are that way in Summerfield, there's an HOA, but.
I know if we sell one more lot.
So the recommendation would be for the zoning board to research practically what are the methodologies of requiring those open space dedications
Got it.
to smaller subdivisions and other small properties. Okay. Next recommendation. And this.
This should not be green, this is an answer to a question.
Shouldn't be green?
Right, well,
Okay,
it was a
good.
question and I answered.
Okay. It was a question about an exemption. The next recommendation, open space that is established as part of a zoning or development requirement cannot be reallocated for another land use. Open space beyond the minimal requirements of the ordinance can only be reallocated through change of zoning or development approvals for the entire site. This gets at some questions about, is it changeable? Is it permanent, or under what circumstances could an open space dedicated area be changed? And the recommendation is that what you see there.
Can't be reallocated because then it would become a non-conforming because that open space was a requirement, a base requirement of the zoning.
So if there's for some reason, the entity that owns that subdivision or that development senses the need for a change, they would need to bring it back through the zoning for a new development. Okay?
So that means if they did 50% of their, was open space, they couldn't go put a few more lots on there without coming back. That makes sense.
Without coming back
Yeah.
through.
And the other.
That doesn't mean you wouldn't approve it, that just means it has to be re-approved.
That's the case now, I mean, that's just that goes back to John's question earlier too, open space beyond the minimum requirements was allowed to be reallocated as farmland in this case.
Now, is that why in some instances I've seen open space dedicate, like it says common area, but it's zoned residential?
Yes, it should, and that common area should be, should say what the common area includes, whether it's open space or just.
It says common area and it's zoned residential, where other common area is, it's zoned, I can't recall exactly, but it's like common area, and it's clear that it's not ever going to be zoned for building where this one, it appears that it could be built on.
Maybe I should look at that with you, because if it's part of a platted greater whole, it can't be.
Yeah, it is, and it's in Summerfield.
And it just might be that you're looking at that area to have a zoning designation. Let's look at it together.
Sure.
And I don't mind bringing this back if it's relevant.
Any further comment on that particular recommendation? And this next one that begins with all roadways, Carrie, I may not understand that.
Okay.
I think that that's answering the questions, or is there a recommendation in that? All roadways are classified by NCDOT, mapped as part of thoroughfare plan. Roads, internal subdivisions are not typically thoroughfares. This section's, I think you're explaining.
Yeah, it's just,
Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
it just changed.
okay, good. Okay, next, policy 3.4, opportunities to connect open space areas and corridors during development. And the first recommendation is to create criteria for requiring the connection of open spaces to include prioritization methodology for relevant resources such as wildlife. It's calling for more criteria and then something that it builds into the UDO, some methodology.
There's a mapping layer, for instance, for, comes from National Parks, just looking at it, it's a mapping layer for potential habitats. So say I open that layer up when somebody brings a development requirement request in, and I see that there is a good potentiality for natural habitat. We create some sort of criteria that says, if you got one of those, you got to especially make sure that it's connecting to other, that takes care of the,
Okay.
that's just an example, such as wildlife.
Any comments on that one? Let's go to policy area 3.5, incorporating clusters of trees to avoid clear cutting trees and other woodland areas. I think this tracks back to the shall and should and may language that you reviewed in policy area 1. And it would use the same sort of protocol of where shall and shall be used.
And it just means that it doesn't disregard the fact that there's a comment that it should be shall.
Okay.
It's just that we need to make sure that the competent gives us that strength.
Okay.
Before we go on,
Yes.
I've been thinking about that section because outside of Summerfield, that Lunsford Road development that was developed from the Richardson, some of the Richardson land. As I understand that, it was under like a woodlands conservation designation before it was sold. And so right before it was sold to the developer, they harvested the trees and just took out everything. And it seems to me that we may not have a mechanism. I guess if you have an existing landowner, you can't say what they can do with their trees, right? But is there